And I think at that stage, those moments of doubt just pop into your head. I'm not good enough, I'm not smart enough, why am I not like the others?
It began with a rumor, but what that rumor exposed could shake the monarchy forever. At first, it was just a whisper so soft, so absurd, it almost seemed laughable. A rumor murmured behind closed doors, passed from one royal insider to another like a forbidden secret. But whispers, when repeated often enough, begin to scream. And this one screamed betrayal. The heart of it? A DNA test. Quietly commissioned, allegedly buried, never acknowledged. A single report suggested that Princess Beatrice, beloved granddaughter of Queen Elizabeth II, firstborn of Prince Andrew, might not be his biological daughter at all. It was a revelation so volatile, so destructive, that it could upend everything the monarchy stands for. Not just a family rupture, but a threat to the very idea of royal legitimacy. Because in the world of crowns and thrones, blood is everything. The royal family has always traded in symbols, lineage, titles, and legacy. These aren't just ceremonial, they're the very foundation of power. The House of Windsor doesn't rule by merit or mandate, it rules by inheritance, a chain of DNA that stretches back through history and crowns. But what happens when one of those links might not belong? What if a single forged link could expose the entire chain as fragile, flawed, or worse, false? There was no press conference. No public acknowledgement. The palace, true to form, met the rising storm with an icy silence. Not a single denial. Not even a distraction. And in that silence, the rumor grew legs. It sprinted across tabloids, snaked through gossip columns, and slid into the dark alleys of royal speculation. What if Prince Andrew, disgraced by scandals of his own, had more secrets hidden beneath the surface? And what if Princess Beatrice, loyal, graceful, quiet Beatrice, had spent her entire life unknowingly living a lie? Suddenly, past photographs were re-evaluated with suspicion. Public appearances, once seen as warm father-daughter moments, now drew side eyes and doubt. Every smile, every glance, every affectionate moment was sliced apart by a single question: was any of it real? Could the royal family, a dynasty under constant surveillance, really have concealed something so explosive for over 3 decades? And yet, the idea didn't seem impossible. This was the same institution that had kept affairs, betrayals, even abdications cloaked in silence for generations. A royal cover-up was not unprecedented. But this wasn't just about scandal. This was about legitimacy. Because if Beatrice's paternity is in question, then so is her place in the line of succession. Her title, her status, her right to exist within the monarchy's gilded structure could collapse under the weight of that one buried truth. This wasn't merely a betrayal of trust. It was an existential threat to the system itself. The monarchy survives because people believe in it. In its continuity. In its bloodline. If that belief begins to crumble, if one royal's entire identity is revealed to be a carefully curated illusion, what else might be a lie? And what becomes of the crown when the truth isn't just inconvenient, it's catastrophic? But to understand the weight of this revelation, we have to go back to where her story began. From the moment she was born, Beatrice was watched, shaped, and trained to belong. August 8, 1988. The birth of a princess wasn't just a family affair, it was a matter of national significance. Beatrice Elizabeth Mary arrived not just as a daughter, but as a symbol. The first child of Prince Andrew and Sarah Ferguson, and the 5th grandchild of Queen Elizabeth II. From her very first breath, she was wrapped in the weight of tradition, swaddled in expectation, and placed under the unrelenting gaze of a public that didn't see a child, they saw royalty. Her name alone took 2 weeks to be publicly revealed, not out of uncertainty, but because every royal decision had to be measured, debated, and carefully orchestrated. Her life would never be hers alone. It belonged to the institution. Ceremony defined her childhood. From christenings to birthdays, every moment was planned and presented with military precision. Her godparents were nobles. Her clothes, selected to convey dignity. Her appearances, timed like clockwork. The palace had a formula, and Beatrice fit into it perfectly, or at least, she was expected to. There were no allowances for normalcy. There was no freedom to stumble, to explore, to simply be. Her role wasn't to grow up, it was to perform. She was born into a pageant that never ended, and even as a toddler, she was already a player on the stage. But she was never alone in this. 2 years after her birth came her sister, Eugenie. And in a life defined by protocol and pageantry, Eugenie was her only real anchor. The two were inseparable not by royal arrangement, but by choice. They shared bedrooms, shared secrets, shared the quiet understanding that no one else could truly comprehend the pressures they faced. More than sisters, they became co-survivors of a life lived behind velvet ropes and glass windows. In the formality of Windsor, their bond was raw, real, and entirely their own. And when their parents separated in 1996, it was that bond that kept them steady. Unlike other royal divorces drenched in scandal and fury, Prince Andrew and Sarah Ferguson managed a rare thing, a peaceful split. They co-parented with determination, presenting a united front when it came to Beatrice and Eugenie. But even that, behind the smiles and statements, came at a cost. Their home was stable, but not private. Every move was monitored. Every gesture, catalogued. And while Queen Elizabeth tried to secure their futures with financial stability through a trust, no amount of money could buy them normalcy. Beatrice's childhood wasn't marked by tantrums or rebellion, it was marked by restraint. She learned early how to behave, how to hold her hands, how to smile without revealing too much. Her education was prestigious, but her real lessons were in diplomacy and how to navigate a world that expected her to represent something larger than herself. Her life was polished, her demeanor precise, but underneath, the pressure simmered. She couldn't escape the gaze. Cameras weren't just at events, they hovered like ghosts over every decision. And the comparisons never stopped. To her cousins, to her mother, to a lineage stretching centuries into the past. Beatrice knew she had no throne waiting for her. She wasn't a future queen. But the crown still hovered, an invisible weight pressing down on her, even as she smiled for the photographers. Her identity, her opinions, even her personality, were all shaped by an unspoken rule: protect the family image at all costs. In this world, authenticity was dangerous. Vulnerability was taboo. And so she played her part, day after day, year after year. A princess, yes, but also a product of careful construction. But what no one saw behind the palace walls was the internal struggle already beginning to form. Even princesses can feel broken, but Beatrice refused to stay that way. At 7 years old, while the world saw a polished little royal dressed for tradition and trained to smile, behind palace walls, Beatrice was crumbling quietly. There were no headlines. No crisis statements. Just a quiet diagnosis that changed everything. Dyslexia. In a family obsessed with composure, where every detail was curated for public consumption, Beatrice had to carry this label like a secret she wasn't supposed to acknowledge. She wasn't failing in school because she was lazy, she was different. And in a monarchy that feared different, this diagnosis felt like a curse. She struggled to read in classrooms that expected her to perform. Writing felt like a battlefield. While other royal children were praised for speeches or academic brilliance, Beatrice fought to simply keep up. Her mind raced ahead of the words, and her spirit dimmed beneath the weight of expectation. But she didn't fall apart. She didn't lash out. Instead, she bent without breaking. She delayed her exams, not out of fear, but strategy. It was her quiet rebellion against a system that measured worth by outdated timelines. She stepped back, took control of her pace, and returned not to survive, but to succeed. When she sat those exams, she didn't just pass. She stunned everyone. With an A in drama, and BS in history and film studies, she proved something no title ever could: her mind wasn't broken. It was simply wired to see the world in a different, perhaps even more powerful way. Still, the pressure never let up. Public life doesn't pause for struggle. She had to smile, wave, stand straight, and embody royal perfection while fighting a war inside her own mind. The cameras didn't care how hard she worked. They only cared whether she faltered. But even through those silent battles, Beatrice carried herself with composure. She didn't hide from the world. In 2005, still a teenager, she did the unthinkable for a royal. She opened up. Publicly. Honestly. She spoke about dyslexia not as a weakness, but as her greatest teacher. She said it made her more empathetic, more focused, and more determined. And in that single moment, the narrative shifted. She wasn't just a princess anymore. She became a symbol of something far more powerful: resilience. Her strength wasn't forged in the ceremony. It was born in struggle. And the public began to see her not just as another face on the balcony, but as a woman who had endured and emerged with dignity. And while others saw dyslexia as a limitation, she saw it as a lens that taught her patience, strategy, and empathy. Those weren't flaws, they were qualities of a leader. And Beatrice, despite the silence, despite the pressure, was becoming one. She didn't stop there. She pushed forward, enrolling at Goldsmiths, University of London, choosing a degree in history and the history of ideas, a field that demanded rigorous reading, comprehension, and analytical writing. The very skills dyslexia made challenging, she attacked head-on. She graduated with honors, not just proving her ability, but rewriting the expectations placed upon her. She wasn't the damaged royal. She was the quietly defiant one. The one who earned her accomplishments without the protection of protocol. But Beatrice wasn't content just overcoming what she wanted out. While the palace waited for her to play her role, Beatrice rewrote the script entirely. She was never supposed to break away. That's not how it works in the royal family. You smile, you wave, you marry well, and you stay close to the script. But Beatrice, shaped by struggle and emboldened by resilience, had no interest in simply existing as a ceremonial accessory. While others clung to the comfort of tradition, she craved something real, something earned. And so, quietly, deliberately, she walked away from the safety of royal expectation and stepped into a world where titles meant nothing. Her first rebellion was silent but symbolic. She took a job at Selfridges, working the retail floor, folding clothes, assisting customers who had no idea they were being helped by a Windsor. It wasn't for the cameras. It wasn't for PR. It was the first time she'd tasted normal life, and she didn't spit it out. Then came Sony Pictures. Then the Foreign Office. Internships, grunt work, zero headlines. The tabloids didn't know what to do with her. A princess doing unpaid work? Choosing labor over luxury? They called her a freeloader, mocked her for not having a defined royal role. But she didn't flinch. She didn't explain. She kept moving, choosing experience over applause, substance over symbolism. The palace had trained her to be obedient. Instead, she became independent. Not loud. Not defiant. Just quietly determined to matter on her own terms. In 2015, she made the boldest move yet. She packed up her life, left behind the grandeur of Buckingham Palace, and crossed the Atlantic. In New York City, there were no curtsies, no tiaras, no whispers of Your Royal Highness. She reintroduced herself simply as Beatrice York. And in the skyscrapers of Manhattan, where nobody cared about bloodlines, she found her proving ground. She entered the corporate world without fanfare and began the climb step by step, merit by merit. No favors. No shortcuts. Just grit. Eventually, she rose to become vice president of partnerships and strategy at a rising software firm. But it wasn't just a job, it was a mission. Her focus? Elevating women in leadership. She wasn't just building a resume, she was building bridges. Her presence on global panels, in boardrooms, at summits, it wasn't just about a job title. It was about using her voice, finally unleashed from the grip of royal decorum, to make change that actually mattered. Beatrice had once been taught that the crown gave her value. But now, she has flipped the narrative. She had built worth from the ground up, far from the castles and cameras. And as the world began to recognize her not as Prince Andrew's daughter, but as a leader, an advocate, and an independent force, she stood taller, freer, and truer than ever before. Yet just as she built a new identity, her royal past came roaring back through marriage. She walked away from one monarchy only to marry into another. In a life already written in the ink of protocol and obligation, Beatrice's love story wasn't supposed to matter. Royals marry well, not for love. They marry strategically, for image. But when Princess Beatrice fell for Edoardo Mapelli-Mazzi, the narrative twisted because this was no fairy tale. This was a collision of two bloodlines from vastly different worlds, both drenched in legacy and both scarred by history. Edoardo wasn't just a wealthy property developer. He was a count. His family's nobility traced back to Italian royalty, carrying a title bestowed in 1913 by King Victor Emmanuel III. It wasn't ceremonial fluff, it was real, ancestral, deeply embedded in European aristocracy. And when Beatrice said yes to Edoardo, she wasn't escaping royalty. She was redefining it. Their wedding could have been a royal spectacle, another grand display of gowns and trumpets and balcony kisses. It was scheduled for May 2020, and all signs pointed to a lavish event at Buckingham Palace. But then everything changed. The world shut down. The pandemic swept across borders, silencing even the most sacred institutions. And at the very same time, another shadow darkened the palace. Prince Andrew's scandal with Jeffrey Epstein exploded across global headlines. The royal family was in crisis. There could be no celebration. The planned reception was scrapped. The guest list vanished. And when the wedding did happen, it was far from the public eye, behind closed doors at Windsor, stripped of fanfare, stripped of protocol. There were no television cameras, no processions, no carriage rides. It was the quietest royal wedding in modern history, and yet it said more than 1,000 ceremonies ever could. Beatrice didn't need noise. She needed meaning. Her gown? Vintage. It had once belonged to Queen Elizabeth herself, reworked and resized for a new generation. On her head, the Queen Mary fringe tiara, the same tiara worn by the Queen on her own wedding day. Every choice was intentional. In silence, she was grounding herself in the past while charting a path entirely her own. She wasn't leaving the royal story. She was rewriting it. But this wasn't just a union between two people, it was the merging of two dynasties. Eduardo came with a son from a previous relationship, Christopher Wolfe, affectionately known as Wolfie. And just like that, Beatrice became a stepmother. In a family that often measures worth through inheritance and blood, she embraced a child who shared neither. She chose love over lineage. And soon after, she became a mother in her own right. In 2021, she gave birth to her daughter, Sienna Elizabeth. Then came Athena, born in early 2025. But even motherhood came with complications. Under royal rules, Sienna and Athena weren't entitled to HRH titles. Not because of anything Beatrice did, but because titles, in the eyes of the crown, pass only through the sons of the monarch. That technicality left her daughters untitled and Britain outsiders to the very system their mother had once been trained to uphold. And yet, fate had another twist. Through their father, the girls inherited aristocratic rank. Not princesses, but contessas. Their nobility came from an Italian throne long lost to history, but in many ways, that made it feel more real. It wasn't performative. It wasn't managed by palace aides or publicists. It was blood. Silent, undeniable, and deeply symbolic. So Beatrice had done the impossible. She stepped out of a system that once confined her, married into another that honored her, and forged a family that didn't rely on public approval to be legitimate. Her daughters wouldn't grow up with balcony waves or tiara fittings. But they would grow up free of the spotlight, free of the monarchy's suffocating grasp, and full of a different kind of inheritance, authenticity. But even as she found peace in love, a decades-old secret was beginning to surface. It started as a whisper, then grew into a roar the palace couldn't silence. The first mention came anonymously, an unmarked envelope, a blurred photocopy, a cryptic tip phoned into a newsroom already saturated with royal fatigue. Most dismissed it. Tabloid noise, nothing more. But something about this whisper lingered. It didn't complain. It suggested. It didn't scream for attention. It begged for scrutiny. Beneath the surface, it hinted at a test, quietly conducted years ago, buried so deep not even palace aides dared acknowledge it. A DNA test, one that allegedly revealed a royal lie so seismic it could collapse the very foundation of lineage that the monarchy has clung to for centuries. The test didn't need a headline. It just needed silence. And that's exactly what it got. No statement. No denial. Just the usual royal strategy: ignore, delay, distract. But this time, the silence did more damage than the rumor ever could. Because every minute the palace said nothing, the noise grew louder. A whisper became a murmur. A murmur turned into a theory. And the theory erupted into a global media firestorm. Articles emerged in waves. Private investigators were named, some of whom had reportedly been tracking the York family for years. They hadn't been hired to chase scandals. They were following inconsistencies. Questions about Beatrice's appearance, her resemblance or lack thereof to Andrew, her quiet distance from certain family events. Tiny anomalies, once shrugged off, now snapped into focus like puzzle pieces falling into place. The public had seen this pattern before. The royal family, after all, was no stranger to scandal. Affairs, divorces, betrayals, all tucked away behind palace curtains, handled with poise and spin. But this felt different. This wasn't about behavior. It was about blood. About identity. about the sanctity of royal succession. If the daughter of a prince was not truly his, the implications weren't just personal, they were constitutional. And that made the palace's silence not just suspicious, it made it dangerous. The press, sensing blood in the water, doubled down. Every archived photo, every past interview, every subtle facial gesture was re-examined under a microscope. Why had Beatrice always seemed removed? Why did she, more than other royals, seem intent on building a life outside the system? Suddenly, what had once looked like quiet independence began to resemble silent resistance. And in the background, whispers pointed to a truth the monarchy could no longer control. But this time, the usual tactics deflection, PR fluff, royal engagement scheduled to change the conversation fell flat. The world had changed. This wasn't 1992. This wasn't even 2019. In the age of digital transparency, people weren't waiting for the palace to respond. They were drawing their own conclusions, and many didn't like what they saw. Because in a family where image is everything, silence is its own confession. What made it worse wasn't just the possibility that the DNA test was real, it was the chilling plausibility of it all. The way the family closed ranks. The way Beatrice's public life shifted. The sudden disappearance of certain photos. The events she stopped attending. And the unspoken understanding that something somewhere had fundamentally changed. The monarchy, long skilled at managing perception, was losing its grip. And at the heart of it all was a quiet daughter, walking away from the only father she ever knew. She didn't scream. She disappeared, and that hurt more. There were no televised breakdowns. No tearful interviews. No dramatic statements issued to the press. Instead, there was silence. Sharp, deliberate, unflinching silence. In the months that followed the eruption of the DNA rumors, Princess Beatrice didn't go to war with her father, she erased him. Not with words, but with absence. One by one, old photographs vanished from her public pages. Birthday tributes once posted with affection were quietly deleted. Family snapshots featuring Prince Andrew, once displayed with pride, were scrubbed like they had never existed. What replaced them wasn't grief or rage, but the unmistakable signal of distance. In their place stood pictures of her husband, her daughters, her work, and her new life. And in that curation, a truth emerged: Beatrice wasn't mourning. She was severely injured. At royal events, where once she and her father had stood shoulder to shoulder, the air between them turned frigid. They didn't exchange glances. They didn't acknowledge one another. She stood poised, her gaze fixed, while Prince Andrew, often just feet away, was ignored like a ghost from a past she no longer accepted. The absence of interaction didn't require explanation. It spoke louder than any confrontation ever could. Observers began to notice, and quickly, whispers turned to certainty. The bond was gone. Whatever had held them together through scandal, divorce, and duty had finally, irreversibly snapped. Some said she was devastated that behind closed doors, the revelation shattered her sense of identity. That she questioned everything, from her childhood memories to the man she once proudly called Papa. Others suggested that she had long suspected the truth, but only now had the strength to accept it. Either way, the transformation was complete. Beatrice wasn't lashing out. She was walking away, not in anger, but in quiet resolve. And in a family where appearances are everything, her disappearance was a brutal act of defiance. But the public noticed more than just her silence. They noticed the precision of it. There was no mess, no chaos. Every move was calculated. Every step back from Prince Andrew, every skipped event, every reshaped social feed, each was a piece of a larger strategy. She wasn't running from scandal. She was reclaiming control. Her father, once central to her royal narrative, had become a ghost she chose not to acknowledge. And that choice didn't scream rebellion, it whispered something more haunting: betrayal. This wasn't just a daughter separating from a disgraced parent. This was a woman unraveling the royal script that had been forced upon her since birth. And with each silent step, she made one thing devastatingly clear: she didn't owe anyone an explanation. Not the palace. Not the press. Not even the man she once called family. Her withdrawal wasn't impulsive. It was surgical. Clean. Cold. And final. But Beatrice's withdrawal wasn't just personal, it was a warning to the monarchy itself. What happens when a royal walks away and doesn't look back? Inside the stone walls of Buckingham Palace, panic was brewing beneath the polished surface. For decades, the royal family had mastered the art of survival, weathering scandal with silence, betrayal with protocol, and rebellion with reinvention. But this time, the script wasn't working. Princess Beatrice's quiet exodus wasn't a headline they could bury. It wasn't a phase. It was a rupture. And behind the scenes, palace aides were scrambling to understand what they were dealing with. Emergency meetings were called. Internal briefings intensified. Senior advisors debated damage control strategies, but none could offer a solution that didn't expose more than it concealed. Because this wasn't just about a daughter walking away from a father, it was about a system beginning to collapse under the weight of its own secrets. The timing couldn't have been worse. King Charles, just months into his reign, was battling a private health crisis that had already sparked public concern. His appearances had grown sparse, his energy noticeably dimmed. Whispers of uncertainty crept into the press. Meanwhile, Princess Kate, the monarchy's most beloved and trusted figure, had withdrawn from public life following a medical ordeal of her own. The royal front line, once so carefully choreographed, now felt like a void. And into that silence stepped Beatrice's absence, louder than a scandal, more dangerous than defiance. Because she hadn't spoken a word, and yet the world heard her loud and clear. For years, she was seen as part of the monarchy's future. Educated, relatable, quietly dignified. The perfect symbol of modern royalty. But now, her silence reads like rebellion. Her independence, once applauded, was recast as a threat. What had been strength suddenly looked like instability. And worst of all, her refusal to deny the rumors lent them power. In a family obsessed with perception, Beatrice's silence was radioactive. Every move she made away from the crown wasn't just personal, it was political. Within the palace walls, the anxiety deepened. The monarchy had relied on an old formula: conceal, contain, control. But that formula was failing in real time. Beatrice had become proof that the royal playbook no longer held authority. She wasn't throwing tantrums on television. She wasn't selling secrets to tabloids. She was simply living her life without them. And that terrified the institution more than any scandal ever had. Because if she could detach this cleanly, what was to stop others from doing the same? The deeper rot was being exposed. Fear. Denial. An unwillingness to evolve. Beatrice didn't start the fire, but she walked through the smoke without flinching. And while the monarchy tried to preserve the illusion of order, the public wasn't buying it. The silence that once stood for dignity now reeked of arrogance. People wanted transparency. Accountability. They weren't interested in pageantry anymore. They wanted the truth. And the longer they waited, the more the pressure built. Every unanswered question turned into an accusation. Every ignored headline became a wound that wouldn't close. And now, with the cracks exposed and the facade crumbling, only one question remains. Beatrice's silence has passed, but the monarchy's reckoning is just beginning. What began as a personal withdrawal has now become a symbol of something far more unsettling. Beatrice didn't just walk away from her father. She walked away from the machinery that built her, the system that shaped her, and the legacy that told her who to be. Her silence was never just about pain, it was about power. In refusing to participate, she exposed the cracks the royal family tried so desperately to conceal. What was once admired as grace under pressure now looks like institutional denial. What the monarchy tried to preserve through silence has, ironically, been undone by that very silence. Because in a world that demands answers, the refusal to speak only deepens suspicion. And Princess Beatrice's quiet rebellion shattered more than just her own illusion, it fractured public trust. The crown has long stood as a symbol of continuity. No matter the era, the scandal, the tragedy it endured. But endurance without evolution is not strength. It's stagnant. And Beatrice's story has made that painfully clear. She did everything the institution trained her to do: smile, obey, remain composed. Yet when confronted with a truth that shook her to her core, she chose integrity over image. And in doing so, she revealed just how brittle the system truly is. Because what does it mean when the people inside the palace walls no longer believe in the myth themselves? Now, all eyes turn to the future. Prince William and Princess Catherine, once the hopeful faces of modern monarchy, are no longer just the next in line. They are the last hope to salvage the public's fading faith. But their future depends not on tradition, not on ritual or spectacle, but on truth. The people no longer want perfection. They want honesty. They want a royal family that reflects reality, not rewrites it. And if the monarchy refuses to adapt, it won't be another scandal that brings it down, it will be irrelevant. Beatrice's exit wasn't loud. It wasn't chaotic. But it was final. And its consequences are only just beginning to unfold. Inside the palace, the question is no longer how to contain the damage, it's how to survive it. Because once one royal walks away with her dignity intact and her silence weaponized, others may follow. The institution is bleeding quietly. And the public can feel it. The monarchy now stands at a dangerous crossroads. Confront the truths they've buried or collapse beneath them. Reinvent or decay. There is no more middle ground. Beatrice may not have intended to start a revolution, but her quiet act of defiance has forced one. The curtains have been pulled back. The fairy tale has been rewritten. And the audience is no longer willing to play along. Because if this is what they were willing to keep hidden, then one question echoes louder than any coronation bell. How many more secrets are waiting to be revealed? The crown has survived scandal, war, betrayal, but can it survive the truth? Drop your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.